right, let's talk just for a moment about MacArthur. I actually went back and read the chapter I missed, which was which one? Because I guess it was
Special
addicts.
needs,
Or special needs, maybe it was. Yeah, because we were doing addicts and immigrants, and what was the last one?
social outcomes.
Social outcasts. Yeah. So, you know, interesting. I haven't read very many books on evangelism that kind of had almost appendages like this one has. So, and matter of fact, it does dovetail a little bit with maybe some of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. But what did you think about, one, those kind of appendages, and then secondly, what you read in them? Any thoughts?
Was it appendages mean extra stuff?
Yeah, well, no, I'm talking about them as if they weren't appendages.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. They were chapters.
Oh, yeah.
But they almost kind of seem like the thing that you would normally read in a book as an appendix. You know, on such and such a subject, and here's thoughts on this, so.
I thought the addiction one was good, and then it was interesting because I started reading that chapter, I think Saturday night, and then her Sunday school session was on it. The immigrant outreach one, I didn't find like personally applicable just because I'm not involved in that, but it was fine. But it was, and then
David?
Well, I had a couple of the chapter 19. Or
19 was
we were supposed to do
Yep,
19, right?
Yep. Yeah, I thought that was that one,
Yeah.
I was surprised to read that one.
I was really surprised at what I think the exegesis, you know.
Yeah.
In fact, he's here. In fact, Matthew explains that Jesus' compassion for the poor was what motivated him to send his disciples throughout the land preaching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you said, yeah, because we didn't
No.
care for it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he had compassion for the poor, but
Yeah.
that's yeah, a couple of places, this
Yeah.
chapter I was a little surprised. I don't know who this guy is, Mark Tatlock.
Yeah, I didn't know either, but I was a little,
He's in here.
matter of fact, and it was like page 272, he kind of stated just the opposite of what I stated the other day about the empty words simile. You know,
Yeah.
he basically made it as this is an
About the poor.
application,
Right.
not a simile of empty words, and it was like, well, no, that's just not the way it is.
Right.
So I was, yeah, I thought that was.
Not one of the strongest chapters.
No, I agree, and I don't know who he is. I'm assuming these are probably all pastors or elders at Grace Community or part of the
seminary.
it says in the back.
Oh, does he?
And it says he's provost of the master's.
Oh, okay.
Of the master's
Yeah.
college.
Oh, yeah.
It gives a little information about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's pretty important.
What is
Pretty-
that? What is it?
A provost is basically the head, right? I mean, that's
Chancellor, I think.
yeah.
Right.
The guy who makes you know, yeah. Good. So, I did think the addiction one though was a lot of good stuff in that, and you know, kind of talking about you know, the issue of addictions. I thought there was some good theology there in dealing with what they are and what they are not. So, good. Anything?
Just a really unrelated, but Sandra Ford, were you in her class? Yeah, I heard it was really good.
It was,
She did a good job
Yep. That's good.
on addiction.
Yeah, so, good. Yeah, there's a couple of other, David, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's the last two chapters we didn't assign. I haven't read them yet. At least maybe chapter 20 more than 21. But I'm wondering if that may be germane to some of the discussions that we're going to be having on the Elder Board in January. Didn't know. So I'm actually gonna read that.
Yeah.
FYI, he's not the provost anymore.
He's
My
not.
favorite prof is now the provost.
Who's that?
John Stead. He's an old school guy.
Is he?
Oh,
Maybe you wrote
See,
been
maybe
there forever.
maybe the guy wrote this and got fired.
So come to lunch and bring your briefcase.
You're familiar with those type of things?
Hey, when I tell you to get a one-way ticket, bring your car.
The guy who was my boss and became a kind of a mentor and good friend, he and his wife of Jenny and I, his name was Bob Provost. And I think he was the provost of the Master's College.
Well, that's
or
right.
something.
That's
Pros.
Yeah, I think he was. So he was a great guy. Still alive. But.
Yeah, when they hired him, the guy mistook his last name for his position.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how he got it.
But it's strange, there was a guy who was here a number of years ago. He was a colonel in the Marine Corps, and his last name was Wimp. And he's just, yeah, not so bad as a colonel, but as a second lieutenant, that had to have been horrible.
That's a side note. I enjoy Matt. I mean, you look at him
Yeah.
and you'd say, yeah, special forces.
Yeah.
Let's go look in the trunk of the car.
Let's talk a little bit, we didn't do animism, I think we should for a couple of reasons. One, animism, primitive religions, it makes up a good portion of the world. And really one of the reasons I think it's probably worthwhile for us to look at it is, there is a great correlation between what you see stereotypically in animism and even what we see in people nowadays. Somebody at the men's Bible study this morning, who was it? JW, was it during the Bible study or after? Maybe it was after, and talking about a funeral he had been to, just some of the atrocious things said at funerals, and his buddy who died, whoever was doing the speaking, was kind of up in that, up there, he was a big hunter. He's out there with his favorite dog, coming in from the field, from the hunt, and he's just enjoying life on one perpetual, hunt, which is, that is about as animistic as you can get. But animism, some of the notes I have here, primitive religions, they take a lot of forms. Some common elements that they have, though, they're usually in undeveloped, what we would call uncivilized regions. Often, and here a lot of it is what you would see in the Pacific Islands, those type of things. A lack of a written language is pretty common. All of life is kind of bent on natural, physical things, farming, hunting, fishing. Not a real strong idea of a supreme God, just spirits in some sense, some of which take the form of they seem to describe as gods and some not gods, and but powers of nature, fearful of those type of things. A lot of the religion is related to the seasons of nature, the cycles of farming. Matter of fact, one of the things you'll see in a lot of animistic places, and I don't have it written down here, the whole witch doctor thing is really a combination of the doctor, the guy who deals with medical issues, sometimes with some degree of root therapy, but always with some aspect of spiritual power behind it. A lot of local gods, many gods, spirits that inhabit objects, which is where animism comes. It's just kind of spirits in the trees, and obviously American Indians, kind of fall into a lot of those categories, tendencies. What's that?
Noble savages.
Noble savages.
If you in church, we always get criticized for taking over their land, but what were the Canaanites doing that the American Indians weren't?
Yeah.
It's just
yeah,
interesting how people see that.
yeah. Matter of fact, today, actually, it is, in a lot of places, it is illegal to, a lot of countries, it is illegal to go into some of these native tribes and change their religion. It's actually, that the anthropologists are trying to protect their, from, typically it's missions related. In South America, there's
There's a place
Brazil.
in India where that young man got killed, that in the country, everybody's up in arms, it went there's a Christian mission.
Oh,
Yeah.
But the country was like, hey, you shouldn't have been here in the first place, you snuck over.
Yeah. Ancestor worship. Sickness is usually associated with, something evil, some type of a spirit. Lots of objects and relics in their worship. One of the things about was it Hinduism or Buddhism? But also not they don't fall in the category of revealed religions. Remember, revealed is the religion that's based on some aspect of somebody from heaven came and said, this is how you should do things. And those are, lots of religions have a, you believe their origin is a revelation. Others, it was just the impression of the people that this is what we should do. And, this inner enlightenment of that type of thing. And most most animistic religions are the same way. There's so many, so wide, so variant that, outside of a few common things that you can attribute to them, they're really, you're not able to classify them or say, well, how do you deal with people who are animistic in their understanding? And it's not nearly as organized as Roman Catholicism or something where you can say, okay, here are some places we know are some areas to both crack the Roman Catholic skeleton and also bring in the gospel. But with animism, I don't know that there's much of any of that. I know a couple of people that have worked with animistic tribes in where was that, Indonesia. We saw some of that when we were there for a short period of time. But probably with that, since there's really nothing there as a basis, I think we're kind of back to where we always go in the end, just the scriptures, just bringing forth the scriptures. And with that, and because most of us aren't going to deal with the witch doctors and the people in Indonesia, but do you think it's fair or unfair, the correlation that really much of spirituality today in America actually looks more like animism than it does kind of a revealed corpus of truth that people have adopted because some prophet said so? I mean, you still have that very, very strong in Mormonism and Catholicism and Islam, but most people like this happy hunting ground, or what else was J.W. saying that he was at or I don't know if he was there, but he was talking about the theme funerals nowadays, and one that he was aware of recently, theme funerals. It was a Dallas Cowboys theme funeral, and so everybody came dressed up with Dallas Cowboys. What's that? Have you seen?
We had, one here locally that we were supposed to go dressed in the colors of the Chiefs.
Yeah.
And then that's what they talked about.
Yeah, I was mentioning to the guys that I've done at the funeral home a lot, and they've got, most caskets, they've got some little emblem that you can stick on your casket of who you are. It could be your height, it could be KU team. obviously it could be your military, you know, Army, Navy, Air Force, but something to stick on your casket, and they market this, they sell it, what would you like to be remembered for? And it's just like, wow, what a statement of shallowness that,
Pathetic.
yeah, that this is the most important thing is how KU's doing this year. So in that, if we have some almost kind of neo-animism going on,
If you look at that tick list that you described, I mean, you could, 80% of that could apply to a lot of folks just wandering down the street and spirit driven, you know, they believe in the wind blowing, and they'll believe in anything but what's truth. And it's just kind of in America.
And I think there's
Yeah.
some people are into what they would call like a spirit animal. I
we have
was,
a neighbor like that.
yeah, and I was at a girls' camp, a couple of years ago speaking, and anyways, in one of the small group times,
Yeah.
another girl had said like to another kid, hey, who would you be if you were, and I was like, oh, that's awful. But that, you know, she would have been like a Christian girl, and that was what they were.
Astrology is big.
Yeah.
It's very big.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the New Age woo, with Deepak Chopra,
You're
and
familiar with
where
that?
they meld it with physics, it's big. Eckhart Tolle would fall into that category. It's kind of they blend it with science.
Yeah, we have a neighbor that considers herself a Christian, and you know, I forget what, Methodist or something, but you know, believing somehow that one of their animals is the spirit child of her departed husband.
Oh my.
She's not messing with you?
No.
Told her she was a pastor, okay.
Run Surly
If she is, she's real convincing. So,
Well, there's this, there's no creator distinction.
yeah.
That's
Yeah, so, you know, a lot of that probably, again, you know, we're dealing with more and more a decentralization of, and it'll kind of play into some other things we're gonna talk about in a minute. And probably in those environments, you know, about the only thing, I think the best thing to do is just keep presenting the truth. Because if you try to go after all of the, you know, the belief structure is just, I mean, there's layers upon layers of, you know, of things that you're peeling back to get underneath that, so. With that, let me see, anything else? Would like to spend today talking about what, for lack of a better term, contemporary issues in evangelism, and I want to divide it up going two different ways. And contemporary issues, primarily what I'm referring to is things that are not the gospel, that often come up in gospel conversations by the other person. And how do you deal with these things that aren't the gospel but come up? What would be examples of things that you would expect or have heard often come up in a gospel conversation, but it's not really the gospel?
Works.
Okay, works, okay, that is probably pretty integral to the gospel. I'm thinking of things that are actually, in a sense, oblique to the gospel. What type of discussions come up usually?
Women's treatment in the church.
Women, yeah, okay, you know, and it's not the gospel. You don't have to have the right view of that, but that comes up. What other things like that would come up?
eschatology.
That probably would.
Yeah, probably. I haven't seen
Not
many
evangelism.
unbelievers get into that. I've seen like creation, you know, comes up. What are some other topics that come up that unbelievers typically are?
Man is basically depraved, you know, they believe that men are good generally, and that,
There again, I think that's still kind of central to the gospel. That comes up often, but that just dovetails right into the gospel. Those are, but I'm, you know,
Hypocrisy.
Same with-
Abortion?
No,
abortion, I think is a big one that comes up, you know, well, you don't believe in abortion.
hypocrisy.
Maybe homosexuality.
Hypocrisy in the church.
You guys don't follow, you know.
Yeah, homosexuality, I think, is comes up. Just a lot of things that side, in a sense, aren't the gospel, and in those things, and as we talk about those kind of contemporary issues, when they come up, you know, any guess? Do you address them? Do you divert? Do you not allow yourself to get diverted? Is it sometimes one and sometimes the other? And if so, what's the difference? What do you do when these things come up? Do you start?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on how much time you have, and if you know, if this is a one shot and your time is limited, then I think you say, well, could we set that aside for a minute and go ahead and you know, say what you want to say about the gospel, make sure that they understand the gospel message, and then get into those. Be one.
Okay, could be a time issue. Although all gospel presentations are time bound, right? Even if we don't have, even if we have no clock set, it's probably not going to go more than, people aren't going to give us much more than an hour or two. And so, and in that time, you know, you could go through a whole litany of.
Yeah, well, that'd be great if you had. I'm thinking.
Well, I'm thinking you're out doing something with somebody you know,
Yeah.
you know, a friend or something, and they've just got lots of objections or things like that, and so again, I mean, have you thought about? I'm sure you've been in a situation where you've wanted to share the gospel with somebody, and they went off and they mentioned something else, and so do you follow that? Or do you not follow it? And in a sense, what's the difference? How does it matter?
right or wrong, like with abortion, I usually ask people, why do you think you have a right to kill another person? Where's that ingrained in the Constitution? That, and I always point out that my rights stop when I get into your rights. I mean, I don't have the right to trample on somebody else's right. I have the right to kill you, you don't have the right to kill a baby.
So are you then, do you consider yourself presenting the gospel, or is that a polemic
Well,
for either abortion
yeah, I
and?
try to bring them back to, you know, that everybody's created in God's image. You don't have the right to kill anybody.
Okay.
But it's almost always presented because of politics as a political noise. They'll go to the politics, and it's like, well, generally to me that's flawed politically and religiously. So let's talk about why you think why is it an American right? You know.
What do you think, Terry? You think you should follow these rabbit trails? You think you should not get distracted with the rabbit trails, and
Well, I
what's the
think you probably
difference?
shouldn't get distracted, but for me, it's just really hard to set them aside. I mean, because they can, you know, it's just, we keep coming back to the whatever they want to argue about, which I don't do very well arguing with it anyway. And so,
I always made a practice of, if a gospel presentation not going down any, very intentionally, and if they shut down the argument or the conversation in that, but I've never had that happen at one time. Just what we're talking about transcends all those other issues, and we're going to talk past each other until we agree on these first principles and these things that.
Yeah.
So I think you can pretty easily refocus. We're talking about eternity and big things, and the other stuff we're not going to even be able to find common ground and understanding unless we share.
Yeah, there's a lot of
view.
truth in that. You're never going to get somebody to understand a biblical view of evil who's an unbeliever. I mean, I just think you can't. But that would be another subject. Well, what about evil? How can, if God is good, how can bad things happen to good people? That's another one. And it is easy to get just diverted so you're talking about lots of things and not the gospel. And so generally speaking, I think it is wise to not get sidetracked. Now, I think we have to say generally speaking, because there are times when some of these peripheral issues
On the path.
are either maybe a path, I think, but
Can you just
actually.
break your own rule though? Isn't evil central? It's not.
I don't think that people have to understand why babies die in the womb,
Oh, okay.
in order to believe the gospel. I mean, you can use everything to get to the gospel. I'm not disagreeing with that, but typically I think to not get distracted. And again, I say typically because Jesus himself, we see both with Jesus himself. Matter of fact, we see both with the woman at the well. The woman at the well, he does specifically address adultery, because in a sense she needed to, there's a couple of reasons there, but if somebody is having a hard time with sin, understanding their sinfulness, and they're living in adultery, it may be a vehicle for them to see whether, that this is in God's eyes a sin, and therefore it is a sin. So it may be necessary to talk about living with your boyfriend or girlfriend, if that's what it takes to get them to understand their sinfulness. In the same conversation, the woman asked Jesus about being a prophet, and Jesus just kind of almost ignores that and gets back to the issue at hand. So it probably takes a little bit of, I think, we got to be hesitant to go down those paths, but there probably are times when some of them are, for whatever reason, are worthwhile to bring up and address. And maybe like David was saying, if nothing else, if sometimes there's a real objection, that if you can answer a few reasonably, placed objections to their objection, then, sometimes people will listen. I know that sounds like a very pragmatic approach.
It depends on the person a lot too.
Yeah.
In other words, are they asking this to?
Is it a
Is it hostile? Is it?
Yeah. Is it
or are they
diversionary?
really asking?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Depends.
And what I get a lot is about the Bible, because that was, there's
Lots of
so many
errors.
translations, errors, and, all those sort of things when you
Yeah.
start talking about the
Yeah.
authority of
So I
Scripture.
know a guy who speaks Greek,
Yeah. So yeah, it does. And unfortunately, we can't always see the heart. But Jesus sometimes answered people's objections, and sometimes he ignored them. But he could see the heart, and so that is something. But a few things, and if you're gonna go down those paths, I think a few things to minimize the danger of getting lost on rabbit trails, irrelevant rabbit trails. One is to make sure that you kind of define the issue real clearly. Make sure you know exactly, because if you're going to bring some germane biblical info into it, you kind of need to know what questions you're answering. That you're answering or talking about the same things they're asking. So you need to define the issues carefully. Then kind of determine, and there may be something else. All the ones we talked about, we would say the Bible speaks to, but just determine, does the Bible even speak to that issue? I'm trying to think, any questions that you might imagine somebody giving that you could say, well, the Bible just doesn't speak to that issue. I don't know. There might be something sometime, but if it doesn't speak to the issue, then you just need to simply say that. Determine the principles where it does speak, and I think the one thing to keep in mind is never to use evangelism as a political or social forum. All right, we are out calling people to to the kingdom of God, not to the Republican Party or the conservative, values, support group or those type of things. Not that they don't come into play, but that's not our purpose. We don't want to use evangelism as a tool for those type of things. A couple of, and we'll, if we have time, depending on how much time we want, we'll maybe look at a couple of those issues. But some other things that I think we have to keep in mind as we, do, in the contemporary scene. And I've put these contemporary philosophical issues, and all these words you're pretty much familiar with. There's overlap in these words. There's a degree of common definition that doesn't always equate with technical definition. But I think whether we list all of these isms, these philosophies or not, I think even just walking through some of the typical names we use will help us to kind of think about these things that are out there. The first one, and I've got 6 of them listed here, and you may have some more, and so let's go through my 6 and add whatever other ones that you all are aware of. But contemporary philosophical issue number 1 is relativism. All right, and we kind of know what that is. No absolute standards of right. Contemporary ones, cultural ones, relative ones. Everything's kind of related to the circumstances, to the culture, to whatever. We have this on steroids right now. That even all of the kind of the race stuff that's going on is all truth is and authority is relative to who you are and where your past has been and all that type of stuff. There's no such thing as an objective standard anywhere. Everything is relative. We've been dealing with relativism for, this is not a new one. What is
Modernity.
Well, probably in all of modernity, but in an emphatic form, probably I'm thinking since the 1930s or 40s. It was about that time that the philosophical schools were even more so than not just lauding relativism and condemning absolutes. And it seems like once the philosophical systems pick it up, then it gets involved in normal man. Normal man probably for a long time was finding ways to excuse their behavior, which was relativistic. But the philosophies came on board, probably a little bit less than 100 years ago, and now it's just taught openly as wisdom is not for you to put your absolutes on me. All right, that is the epitome of arrogance, which 150 years ago everybody would have at least given lip service to the fact that there are absolutes that are outside of us, that exist outside of people.
For the record, I post-modernity, which I think it's an essential component of post-modernity,
Yeah.
which is 1930s, 40s.
Which is about that time frame. Yep. And so I think that's alive and well. It isn't going where it works itself out, and it's actually maybe either the underlying or the common thread to another one that's very big, and it's related to that. But it's a little bit different. Is individualism today. Individualism is stronger than it's ever been. Our relativism was for a long time based on group relativism. The culture is finally figuring out that these things, and we got to go with whatever the group goes with, and if the group thinks living together outside of marriage is okay, it's okay, and we've been in that for a long time. But recently we've gotten into individual relativism. You don't even need a group anymore. You just need a group of one. And if who am I to say to anybody, no matter what their wacky beliefs are, that for some reason they shouldn't have that. And so whatever everybody says is right. If it works for me, it's true for me. You know, and then we will always, and you probably have heard this, you know, a number of times from people, you know, when you share the gospel, and they will say, well, if that
Works for you.
if that works for you, I'm happy.
Yeah, I'm okay, yeah, I'm happy.
Right? And therefore, you need to be happy with what works for me, all right? Because this is what works for me.
Just asking how that's working out for them.
Yeah. So that I think is more emphatic in, I don't know, not that it matters, but I would guess that has become more emphatic in the last decade. Longer than that, anybody, Steve, you've been around for a while, you think it's been longer than that, or
No,
you think it's increased recently, or not?
it's, I'm not hardly even aware of it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah.
maybe.
They're so isolated, individual.
Maybe.
Everybody you talk to.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I think of,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Andrew.
no, I was thinking of people close to me that I'm praying for, and I wish they'd come to the gospel, and family.
Mhm.
It's a big one.
The
So,
individual.
and particularly folks I would typically have a lot to agree on with, and
Yeah.
politically, socially, you know,
Yeah.
I might say is a good person, that kind of stuff. This can be really hard to overcome.
Terry, and, yeah, I had this conversation with Amy's sister in
Yeah.
California just recently, so I was,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
oh, I'm glad that works for you, but,
Yeah. Yeah. A big one out there nowadays is, and this is a little bit different direction. I use the term philosophical naturalism. You can use just the term naturalism, but sometimes
Metaphysical naturalism is philosophical.
yeah, it's that the basic idea of the term as it's used that way is that the natural world and the study of the natural world, which is science, are the only true and verifiable realities. Right? If we can't verify it, there's no reason to believe it isn't true. If science doesn't support it, then you're kind of reckless to believe it. Anything that is not, does not somehow touch the natural world is at best superstition, or at, you know, and at worst, you know, who knows what. And so anything, you know, that exists outside of it, miracles, there's no place for miracles, there's no place for divine beings, there's no place for anything. One of the craziest things I've always thought about the evolutionary mindset and the you know, the fact that somehow, or maybe someday science is gonna that scientists think they're gonna find the beginnings, and that if it's gonna be a true finding of the beginning, then we've got to do this without God. You've got to take God out, because if you have God in science, it's not true science, and so science has got to be without God. And it's like, you know, it's like saying, okay, I want to put together this puzzle, but I'm not going to use 10 of the pieces. You know, you're making you're trying to, you're a priori eliminating not only possible answers to your dilemma, but according to the scripture, you're eliminating the answer to your dilemma. So, but even from a scientific perspective, to a priori limit your data and say, we will not look at this data, but we still think we have a good chance of finding the answer, it's illogical, unless, of course, and this is where science had to eventually go and where we are right now, unless, of course, that you get to the point of philosophical naturalism, that unless science can prove it, it just isn't there. And we are full blown into that. You know, the coronavirus is another aspect of it. You know, everything about us is given to science is gonna save us, science is gonna figure this out, you know, that's our best hope. That's our best chance, is to get our brightest minds working on this, and then we're gonna be able to make this work. And you hear that all over the news media and everywhere else. But that's a big one out there.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm maybe not explaining this right, but what I've, and that maybe I'm not even thinking clearly on this, so you can correct me. The way, when you talk about it, it seems more like you think even we should have a biblical worldview and a recognition of the Creator in when we're doing science, of the science ideal.
The only way you can do true science is to take into account all of the real entities.
Okay.
And if God is a real entity, you can't do true science without
I've been
bringing
personally taking the position, and not a lot, but I've spoken a few times too, to where science deals with the natural world, and it deals with disproving things. Not proving things, but disproving things. That's a scientific method. And it's trial and error in that way, and so it's just a difference, categorically different, and so it shouldn't be, it's going to have its set of issues, and I'm not saying they're completely distinct and there's not overlap, but I think the problem is more science getting outside of its purview than it is.
I wouldn't
We
go
need to
there.
bring-
I think you're already giving up ground you don't,
Yeah, see, that's
you
why I'm
don't
asking.
need to, you
Yeah,
don't
so-
need to give up. And it isn't, you can't do, you know, I mean, it's illogical to think you can even do science, experimental science. What makes you think you can do that science if they're without, where do those laws come from? We call them natural laws. You know,
Yeah.
that,
Why does gravity work?
yeah, you know, your assumptions are all based on
My very life and breath
that there's.
is sustained by, but I mean,
Yeah, that there is order in nature and the universe, and where'd that come from and all that.
I think it's foolish,
Yeah.
but I don't know that you need to recognize where it came from. Or in the
If-
science world.
If, for example, one of the reasons where it used to be entertained, at least to be considered, is where you run into problems, because that's why we talk about realities, that you have to take into effect everything that's real, and God is real. And where you run into problems is every time that a reality that you're not considering is intervening into the reality that you are considering, every place that divine nature intervenes, you have no way to see that.
And you're assuming a closed system.
You're
when you
assuming a
don't
closed
have-
system, that's a good way
you
to
don't
put
have
it.
yeah.
And one of the basic premises of theism versus agnosticism is God not only created, but He is constantly active in this world. He's constantly doing things, sometimes through the medium of natural laws, but often through the suspension of natural laws to do things for His own good pleasures. They think, you know, certainly anything called a miracle is a reality that science is completely, to look at that data and to use that data, they'd be completely, they have no chance.
I guess the point is they don't have any chance. It's just outside of their purview.
Yeah, and in modernity, or what we're doing right now, it becomes aggravated in that they won't even allow even if they don't understand it, they won't allow for its presence.
They have to fill that back.
They have to fill it with
Yeah.
something. And,
To keep their system coherent in their big explanation of things.
Okay.
There's a little bit, my brother's a scientist, and their grant system, it's all paid for by the federal government.
Yeah.
Religion can't be there, and so even if they do or don't believe, then they just kind of like, I'm not gonna go over there, because I won't get paid,
Yeah.
and it just,
Yeah.
to your point, when things don't go right, as they expect, they're like, well, we have to go figure out why it didn't go right, and they won't accept that it's,
But
and then they're deeper down in this other hole and just keep going and going, it never works, till they go, that doesn't work. But they never will come back and say, well, let's look at, just, I beat my head talking to him all the time. Just,
And probably somewhat like what David was saying, we have so, that it has, those two things have been so separated in the last, I don't know, I'm guessing here we're talking 50 to 60 years. The last 50 to 60 years have been so separated that we have come to believe that in order to do good science, you must put this out of where the older astronomers and stuff did their science in the context of their theism, and
Yeah, and that's where it's sort of allowing, thinkers to think in terms of two tiers of knowledge. There's, and how we pursue knowledge in the natural sciences, the hard sciences. You go at that one way and you apply certain rules in those areas, and different rules when it comes to morality and faith and those sort of things.
I find myself falling into that thinking and
Yeah,
becoming
you gotta
aware
fight
of
that.
my thinking.
one of the
And
interests
not let the
in a different area of science, but economics, one of the, for example, in, is it Habakkuk? I think it's Habakkuk. I love the passage. I think it's Habakkuk, where he says, you are out, I'll paraphrase, you're out beating yourself up to make money to put it in purses that have holes. And it's like, no economic theory can account for God putting holes in your purses. And he does. And then so we try to make an economic theory
What do you mean, that's globalism?
to account for it, and so we're trying, and so whatever we come to the conclusion, well, the reason those people have holes in their purpose is because they're not, whatever, globalizing or whatever reason we come to is wrong from the get-go, because we refuse to accept the fact that God is just putting holes in their purses. And as Christians, as theists, we adamantly believe that God is at all times active and intervening.
Yeah.
Or origin of coronavirus. It might be a monkey in China. It might have purely secular origins, and God may have used purely natural origins, or God may not have. But if you dismiss the option that he may not have, that we may never know, we need to deal with the plague of God on us, then your science is doomed to you very likely you have eliminated the answer, and you're searching now for something else.
Yeah, and we have strong empirical proof, and this isn't something you could necessarily use with somebody unless you've really gotten into a deep conversation, but we are not doing good science anymore. We haven't been doing good science for a long time. And as we've taken God out of the picture, we're rearranging things. We have technology, we're building on science, good science that was done 150 years ago, but there hasn't
Definitely
been
some
that much good
diminishing
science.
returns.
I'm afraid they're chasing patents. I mean, if you look at some of the documentation, it's like, well, we want to get a patent so we get paid for
Jim,
17.
you act like everything comes back to money all the time. Where did you ever come up with that idea?
Well, it's reality.
Yeah.
Sorry for the
Wait a
rabbit trail. My fault.
That's where I hang around my rabbit trails.
No, and just even, when do we go to the moon? 1969. When you think of just the things that have happened, we've taken science that was done, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, and we've
That's
we've
engineering
tweaked
now.
it.
Don't forget the
We've gone
engineers.
into the Japanese mode, of applications,
Right, Steve?
but
Yeah.
we're not doing good science.
The engineers are starting to fight back. They're going, that's not science, that's engineering.
We're gonna strap you to all this hard.
Well, scientists are getting all the fanfare.
Another one, and it's kind of along the same line, and again, there may not be may only be vague, nuanceical differences. Rationalism is still kind of alive and well, was very much alive, historically, following the Dark Ages. Rationalism, our mind is gonna save us, and that has never really went away since the rationalistic age. What was that? What was rationalism? Was what, 1400s? Kind of that.
How is this distinct from enlightenment?
That was all in the same area. Rationalism, Enlightenment were kind of, dovetailing, kind of precursors to the Reformation, and so a return to a good return to thinking in the mind, but then it became an idolatrous return to the thinking in the mind.
Autonomous
What's that?
reasoning. Autonomous reasoning.
Yeah, and so, and that's still out there, pretty strong. That it's got to be rational. I've got to be able to put it together. If I can't put it together, then it's not true. And people fail to realize that if there is a God, He's probably smarter than you are. And He probably does some things that you don't understand. I've had people say, well, if that doesn't make any sense to me, and therefore I can't believe it, because my reason has got to be supreme in my mind. Pragmatism has been around for a long time. One that is really, I think, in the last, again, maybe 10 years with individualism. Hedonism, it's always been around, but every so often it gets really, really strong, at least in our culture. And here again, we probably should preface to say that a lot of this stuff we're talking about is Western culture and maybe even American Western, okay? But these are things that we're probably going to run into in our own. We don't want to say what's going on in Central Africa, because a lot of other things are probably happening. But hedonism is clearly for the last 10 years has gotten a hold of people really emphatically, especially young people, but not just young people, old people with their bucket lists, and young people with if you don't love it, don't do it, and all these type of things, and I've got to love what I do and do what I love and all that type of stuff. So that hedonism is alive and well.
This may be a landmine, but Piper and his.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you play that into that?
I think Piper, my personal opinion, and I know Piperites. Jay, I love Jay, but Jay was a Piperite, and others are. Piper should. He didn't say anything wrong, but he said things that weren't right enough.
Or imbalanced.
It's a great summary of Piper in general. He doesn't say anything wrong. He stays just careful enough with the wording, but he also doesn't say it quite enough.
And it resonated. What Piper said resonated because of the hedonism, and again, and some guys even told him, said, "Hey, come on, you're crossing the line," and he got really kind of he doubled down and said no, and he has a huge long explanation of why it's not wrong. It's like, well, okay, but most people who hear what you say don't know aren't thinking the huge long explanation. So yeah, there was problems with Piper in that regard. I think
Jonathan Edwards, he took a lot of what Jonathan Edwards said and just became imbalanced.
I like what Dad said about John Piper. It's like a woman preacher. He thinks like a woman. Apologies
I
to the
said
women here.
that?
Apologies to the women here.
For the record, that was David Hoppus again. I think he lives on Candlewood Drive.
So we're going with deniability.
I think what I said, and I watched John Piper and John MacArthur on stage one time, and I thought, there you go, it was the, you know, he was not emotional, he was emotive, it was all emotive about, and the difference was just so stark, and that's what, he was in balance that way.
Yeah. So those are some, those are the ones I had thought of. Other philosophical kind of mindsets, that's what we're talking about when we talk about philosophy, you know, common mindsets.
I
that are
have
Skepticism,
Oh,
radical
sorry.
skepticism, yeah.
good. And you see it playing out in what ways, David?
Well, it's just, you know, it's related a lot to relativism, but that we can't know anything. It's, you know, and it's not possible, so, you know, why bother?
Can you guys help me name something? I've been trying to put a name on. Maybe you can tell me, but maybe it's wrapped up in one of these. But I've noticed we've got more information, and this is what's really changed in the last 10, 20 years. Information's been on parabolic exponential curve. And with that, everybody also has it in their fingertips. And there's this, I think it is a mindset somewhere, but I don't know how to kind of put my finger on it. Where they go and get the information. It's almost, at the same time, a complete distrust of institutions and experts, but a complete
Getting all your
faith
information.
in
Yeah.
whatever the
Yeah.
machine is feeding you, and having an arrogant faith
Yeah.
and reliance on their own ability to understand the most complex things
Yeah,
in seconds.
yeah.
I don't know. It's not. They're not thinking. They're just taking in, but they also have a faith in dependence. I haven't quite put my finger on how to wrap this up, but I think it underpins a lot of our problems when we look at politics and how to digest all kinds of issues and make decisions. So.
Yeah, I don't know how you would describe that, but I know what you are describing.
Like
and-
technology.
Yeah, kind of a.
Just
It's a big joke at work. We
It's
don't know
something
what
new
to
with
do,
the
we'll look at
information
YouTube.
age.
Yeah.
Because that hasn't
Every
existed.
after we fix that.
It hasn't existed in any prior age. Having
Yeah.
this much information so readily available, it's a
Actually,
fire hose
well,
of information.
it plays into our lack of humility, our arrogance, and,
Yeah.
you know, that sort of thing.
What if you that power curve, Andrew, started? Oh, I guess what would it have been? Probably in the 30s. If you, I have a book. I have his book up there on my shelf. But and we had him here a number of years ago. Mel Swenson. Was it Mel Swenson?
The doctor?
Doctor.
Talking about,
Yeah. Wrote a book back in the 80s called Margins.
Yeah.
And he talked about the information glut, and he actually tracked it. He graphed it and made it very clear. And one of his statements he said back then is that the average person encounters more information in one edition of the New York Times than a guy did his entire life just 100 years earlier, right? That the information from, let's say, the 1850s to the 1980s, the parabolic curve was like this. And he was already saying that we are information overload. Now, and it's true, and he's got, it's really interesting to see it from here to here. And now, you look at 2020, and this was like child's play. But the issue of massive information overload already existed, and now we're...
The difference now is it's not just that it's there and you choose or not, it's that it's anything and everything is literally at your fingertip. Any question you have, any thought that you have, what's that word mean? How do you do this thing? How do I think about this issue? Is COVID dangerous? Whatever whatever it
You can
is.
find a YouTube video.
Or, and search it, and you guys, I don't know how familiar you guys would be, but it's particularly, I
Yeah.
mean, in younger generations, I mean, that's how they don't read anything either. They skim the top, skim the bottom, and that's how they make their decisions on things. Okay, well, anyway, that's
Yeah, no, we're gonna put a title on that at some time. You know, it's like but someday we'll put a title on that, because it is very determinative in thinking and philosophy of where we're true. Much of this stuff that we're talking about is really epistemology. You know, where does truth come from? You know, truth is relative. Truth is individualistic. Truth is found in nature, and so it
Yeah,
is.
there's a guy that, Cal Newport,
yeah,
wrote a book about this.
deep work.
Yeah, deep work, and being able to, he said, in the future, those people who can resist that temptation and learn how to think deep and think slow about subjects will be the ones that, kind of figure it out.
Knowledge workers is what he calls them. I think, yeah.
So, any other kind of mindsets that are, we're likely to encounter?
I don't know what you would call it, but like, you only live once.
YOLO.
YOLO, yeah.
YOLO?
YOLO, you only live once? Yeah.
Only live once.
Yeah.
YOLO. I guess
Yeah.
it is true, isn't it?
That's a bit of the hedonism.
Yeah,
Is it? Yeah.
I would think that would be kind of almost a
Live,
subset.
laugh, love falls into that.
Oh,
too.
yeah, live, laugh, yeah.
You know, with all of that, most people that we run across are not going to be philosophers. They're not going to be the Kants, even the Pipers. They're going to be just normal, everyday people with everyday problems. But this stuff is going to be interspersed in their thinking, and
They latched on to what makes them feel.
somehow
That's me, I'm
yeah,
a skepticism, that's me.
it's gonna be there, and their thinking is gonna be affected by it. And so to kind of understand at least some basic premises and then how to go about maybe giving some counter information on absolutes and,
You think that goes back to where God's ingrained, that God exists in everybody, but they
I think-
find something else to kind of hang their hat on?
Yeah, I'm sure.
You know,
Yeah, I would guess that yeah, so. When you talk about the moral issues, those were some contemporary philosophical issues. I just looked at a couple that I thought would be likely to come up, and maybe something that you've got to deal with. And I just put down three. Abortion, because it just stays at the front of our culture. It's major issues in political campaigns and political parties, and so it's just it's always there. Capital punishment, I don't know that that's really even. I think we're so far down the line. I'm not even sure if people are arguing about that like they used to. Maybe euthanasia and homosexuality. And probably the fourth, or the other one would be the issue of adultery. That is just kind of like, it's just completely a different mindset. And it's not unlikely that as if you're witnessing to someone that they would be in an adulterous relationship, two people living together, not unlikely. Very unlikely that it's very unlikely if it's a single person that they're not in an adulterous relationship, even if they're not living with someone. Very unlikely that they're not. Maybe a married couple might be faithful for some altruistic reason, but that's very common. Matter of fact, it's so common that I confront people who come to church and say they're Christians and believe they're Christians and are living together. I had a young couple the other, not long ago. And interesting side story, and I sat and found out that he's living with, he came to church for a while, and so then he one time he mentioned it was a we, and I said, well, who's the we? I said, well, my girlfriend. I said, well, where's your girlfriend? They find out they live together, so go and meet with them and just talk very, I think, compassionately, but forthrightly about you can't do that as a Christian. This is a sin against God, and if you need to separate, and if you're going to marry this girl, then you need to marry her. If not, then you need to move on. And they were both there, him and her, and that's right. And we'll think about it, and I was like, and it should start tonight, and a week later, she's in ICU because they had a massive car wreck. Car just sideswiped them. And I thought, well, maybe that will kind of get their attention. It didn't get their attention. Isn't God good the way He protected us from dying? So it's just, they just don't even see it even when you say it. So, but in that case, that wasn't necessarily an evangelistic conversation. In some sense it was for me, because I'm not sure I don't want to doubt his profession of faith. They could articulate what the gospel is. They did, but clearly dealt with that with them. But abortion, if you got to deal with it, how do you deal with it?
Wait a second, are you against capital punishment?
No.
He was a Catholic, Just comic relief.
Abortion, how do when do you address it, when do you ignore it, and how do you address it if you address it? Hard subject?
That's one I set aside, like I described previously.
Do you?
Yeah. But we're not going to be able to really understand each other. We're just going to talk past each other until we agree. We share a common worldview and understanding of sanctity of human life. But
And if you weren't going to look past it, why would you not look past it?
It's that sanctity of human life thing. I mean, that just say, I'm sorry if that's wrong. And I'm not going to argue with you, but
does serve as a good example of great comfort. It talks a lot about take people to 10 Commandments, and it does serve as a good example of thou shalt not kill. And although then you have people, well, that's not killing, it's a woman's right, and it's choice, and it's tissue, and all those things. And so it is, and it may be just theoretical and political for someone, and it may be best just to let it go.
I guess if you're dealing with a woman who's had abortion and is feeling that
sense of
that
most
guilt,
guilt.
convicting them, very carefully navigating that would be worth it.
Go ahead, David.
Well, if I get the chance, I address it head on, and just, I've even used I have a little plastic or rubber baby. Until it's 8 weeks, and just show them.
And why do you do that? What are you trying to accomplish in them evangelistically? Not politically, but evangelistically. What are you trying to accomplish?
Well, to get them that their spiritual blindness. They are ignoring. Again, that this is an image bearer of God. That it is murder. Abortion is murder. It's a sin, and you're just ignoring what is biblical truth. And so if somebody will listen, I don't have any problems being that that blunt.
There is a little bit of a historical basis for that in places where there, for example, alcoholism, drunkenness was just rampant. Great evangelical revivals took place in the context of abstinence. And it was like the culture, was okay with drunkenness, everybody got drunk, and it was just like, this is reprehensible, and revivals would often follow on the heels of abstinence kind of declaration, where there was this recognition that, we have adopted whole heart, mind, and soul, this absolutely abhorrent, thing as
You talking about
normal.
prohibition, like a prohibition, or are you talking about an
No, I'm talking about
abstinence movement?
abstinence movement,
I got it.
and not prohibition. England had large abstinence movements, and very often key in some of the evangelistic or the revival type of things. So you can
Abstinence happened first before the revival?
the
Or the revival?
the using of alcohol to show the using of alcohol drunkenness to show the depravity, like kind of what David was saying, the absolute depravity that has been in blindness that's been adopted and has so driven us and guided us, and it's like, and wow, how contra that is to God.
This is
I kind of
just
think
a
what,
clear example of a cultural lie that is, is just being, perpetuated,
Yeah.
and there's just, even, there's this big thing about sonograms. They can tell that how, if a woman sees a sonogram, that how much it changes her mind. I don't even, in today's world, I'm not even sure I buy that. What woman, if she has any education at all and she's in exposure, that she does not understand that life does begin at conception, and it's just blindness. You're continuing to buy a lie that the culture is perpetrating on women, and it's time to open your eyes.
So maybe a principle and a principle to think through on these things, because I don't know that there's right and there's an absolute, but probably there's two areas where dealing with these issues are profitable. One, when they are given, accepted, widespread cultural norms that define us. Then I think that it's probably it is a good segue into the gospel. But in much the same way that the worship of idols, the Canaanites and the Amorites, those things were brought up to show their depravity in the worship of idols and animistic religions, to say, this is widespread, it's accepted, and do you know that it is abhorrent to the God who created you, and therefore you're in trouble, kind of a scenario. So when it is widespread cultural adapted cultural sins that have been embraced, it is probably more often profitable to if it comes up to address it. The other time is probably where that, for some reason, that the same type of thing is taking place, not necessarily on a culture-wide issue, but on an individual issue. If you're talking with someone who's homosexual, and they believe that to be normal and not part of the issue in their life, then that can, and that they're really they're a pretty good person because they have a loving homosexual relationship, then that is probably a good place to say, okay, this thing which you identify yourself, do you understand that this is abhorrent to the God of yours, whether it's homosexuality or adultery, living together, to heterosexuals living together. When it is, when you come to understand that it's big in their life, the danger is that people will turn you off because they think you're just preaching moralism or conservatism. That's the danger. In that sense, to do some of the things like Ray Comfort does, maybe you want to caveat some of that with some of the things like lying. You know, have you ever lied? Well, you're a liar. You know, the 10 Commandments address lots of issues, and so you'd probably be well served to disperse some other things in there so they realize you're not just anti-homosexual or anti-abortion, but you are anti all things that God is abhorrent with, and so.
You gotta be careful not to end up spending most of your conversation in evangelism talking about the negative aspects rather than who God is, defining him just by what he is not.
Yeah.
I don't know, but
Yeah, I don't know that, you know, clearly, you know, you've got to get to God, but the biggest problem I have seen typically is getting people lost. You find somebody that's convinced of their lostness, and they usually listen a lot closer when you talk about the way out, and getting them, that's been my, you know, not that you should, you know, I think your point is well taken, but if you don't get them lost, you'll
So really, to think a lot about repentance, you know, that's really what it's all about, and if you just keep,
yeah,
you gotta repent, you gotta repent, and that's the way, that's what,
Well, and define lost, or, you know, I mean, that's what I think you have to.
have you ever had somebody
really
who didn't have some conviction of their?
yeah.
You've had a cheerful believer.
Who didn't have conviction of what? Of that they were sinners?
Yeah.
I have actually remembered 2 people in particular that told me, one was a lady in Poland and one was here in the States, that they have never sinned.
No.
Never.
No, what I meant is having
Well-
somebody who is in one conversation who goes from the happy, hedonistic, cheerful pagan
Oh,
who doesn't believe, who thinks they're a good person.
it's a light bulb on.
Right. My experience is that's almost the sorting of ground. If that's not a little soft, at least, if they don't have some recognition of their own guilt, and
yeah, I don't know if I could say I've ever.
they don't know who.
noticed-
They may
yeah.
need to understand it's in their position to God,
Well,
but,
yeah.
and who that.
Well, I think you run into people quite a bit that realize that they'll say they're a sinner, or, you know, that they sin, that they don't, you know,
But
that
my
they
neighbor-
lie,
but my
they
neighbor
do
Bob,
other
yeah,
things,
see-
but that they don't understand, you know, how serious that is. You know, they don't
Yeah.
understand,
It's the nobody's perfect. sin.
yeah, nobody's
Uh-huh.
perfect, but they don't understand what that means in terms of a holy God, and,
You get a lot, I'm
What-
better than the next guy. Look at my neighbor, or look at a guy across the street, you know, it's just, he's really bad.
Yeah, it is, you know, I don't have huge experience, but my experience is when somebody starts getting convicted of their sin, you can kind of see it in their eyes. You know, they're in their questions and their demeanor, not always, but it's kind of like, it's like you can tell, okay, it's hitting there. It's something's striking home. The Holy Spirit's opening up their eyes to their sin.
yeah, and of course, Ray Comfort only shows you know, the best videos, but you see that in his videos, you see that change actually take place, the conviction, you know, come into, you know, somebody's,
I guess what I'm saying is, if you don't start seeing it happening, spending a lot of time on like the issue of abortion is probably not going to crack. I guess it was my.
Heard somebody said one time, and this was in the context of evolution, because evolution typically is the denial of the creation account has such an effect on authority in life, and so a particular series of studies we used to do often in Poland, one of the first ones was on on the authority of God as creator, that evolution didn't happen. And one of his comments was that, you know, you may not sink their evolutionary ship, but you sure can shoot some holes in it and let them know that it's leaking, and then send them away to be thinking about it. And so sometimes there's some benefit in that. Here is, for those who are interested in continuing, there won't be anything between now and the end of the year. And then we're gonna pick up again in January. Gonna change the format a little bit and actually just plan to meet, for lack of a better term, every other week. So we're not gonna meet every week. It'll be less classroom time. There will be some times that we don't meet, that there'll be some reading that you'll need to do. And this is a schedule that goes out through March. Go ahead. There's two books, and I didn't have Amanda order any because I didn't know how many people wanted to continue, so I'll just let you order your own. One is Robert Coleman, The Master Plan of Evangelism. It's an old book. Man, I'm not sure when it was originally. 1963.
Robert Coleman.
Robert Coleman, 1963, originally published. You know, in the 80s, when I was doing all of my theological study, it was considered a classic. And so it was 20 years old then, and I think it still is. Apparently Coleman was the Distinguished Senior Professor of Evangelism and Discipleship at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. And so the interesting thing about this is the title is a little bit misleading. It's called The Master Plan of Evangelism, but it's really more about discipleship, and which is kind of interesting, because at first I wasn't going to use it for the section on discipleship, but it is about, you know, how Jesus made disciples, and so I think it works well. And this book you can take one of these copies if you like. This was written by Jay Lickey. If you were here Sunday night, Jay, most of you probably know Jay, he pastors ODF. He was the associate here for a while. Good guy, great guy. He wrote a little book on discipleship, and it is just really good. Matter of fact, Johnny Mack endorsed it. So Johnny MacArthur. So can it be bad? He went to school.
That's master's nepotism.
He went to school at MacArthur. One time, he said Emily got him Emily got him for his birthday a lunch date with John MacArthur. I guess I'm sure that's really hard, but she got him a lunch date. And so he had lunch with John MacArthur one day, and there was either Jay brought a book, or John was giving him one, and I don't know if Jay asked that he would sign it or autograph it, or if he just did it normally. I think. You know, and so he asked him, you know, so he asked him what his name was, Jay Lickey, and so he said, well, and how do you spell that? And Jay said, and I said, Jay. And he realized, he must have seen MacArthur's face, but he realized that wasn't the question. He said he was so embarrassed. He said he could have died right there.
No recovery.
no recovery. So. But he did a great job on this little book. As a matter of fact, I might have Jay come and spend a session with us, and he'd love to do so.
Is there in making a decision whether to continue, or are we supposed to be thinking about something, or it's just whether we're
no, I'm going to continue according to this schedule, and if somebody comes, I'll be here.
Now, And the Christian missions and biblical perspective.
Yeah.
Who's the author?
That book is a great book. J. Herbert Kane, but it is out of print. And so what I am doing is I am
You're gonna make
taking
copies?
mine, I'm gonna do copies.
Okay.
There's just nothing else out there on missions that is anywhere
Oh.
near as good as that is. Unfortunate it's out of print.
We can have Amanda order the other book.
You could have you could have Amanda order, yeah, if you need to, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, ask her to and order you a copy.
Okay,
But make sure, and I'll leave this one on my desk or something,
okay.
so.
Yeah, that's the Christian Missions and Biblical Perspective. So
Christian
it's out of
mission
print.
and biblical perspective, it is out of print, yep.
And he's Googling it.
You betcha.
So if you can convince me, if you want to reprint it, that would be great. So let's close in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for the readings we've been able to do and the discussions and the kind of thinking through evangelism, Father. It's we want to be better. We want to be faithful. Father, we know that in one sense, evangelism is as simple as one blind beggar telling another blind beggar where to find food, and so we don't want to complicate the situation. But we're told to be ready to have an answer, a defense for the hope that lies within us, and so we pray, Father, that we would have that and that we would be continually sharpening that in our lives for the sake of your kingdom and for the sake of our service unto you. And we ask these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.